So today is going to be a little bit more of a deep and even a personal video because I really want to talk about 5 things that I really learned from 1 year out of work. And actually it's even more drastic than that because as most of you guys know is that during the pandemic, I basically went out of work for about 1 year. Nobody in my industry was employed during that time period. A background about me is that I currently work in the events industry. I did stuff in TV and film, but I've had a really weird career background because I've also jumped into things like engineering and tech. There was a whole background story to why I left the engineering and tech industry to bounce into creative entertainment, but that's probably a story for another day. Maybe feel free to comment if that's a video of interest, why I left the engineering, high corporate tech industry. But the big idea is that when I went unemployed for 1 year, because everyone in my industry went unemployed for 1 year because events just physically were not happening during that time period, the biggest thing is that it was a very, very deep and personal time of a lot of reflection. And one of the more interesting things I think is that as ironic as it is to say, this whole community and channel was really built off of a group of people that were unemployed coming together to be able to share information. So if you have been here for a while, feel free to maybe leave a comment down below. Huge love and thanks for being here throughout this whole time, because this really was a community and teamwork effort that really helped to put everything here, then bring us all together right now at this time. But the big idea is that what I really want to talk about in this video today is just about 5 lessons that I really learned from being unemployed for a year. And even once I was able to get back employed following that 1 year, it wasn't a very, very sudden process. It was very, very gradual because we were still trying to build up hours because the industry was still recovering. So even during that time, you can even say that we were actually unemployed. And by we, I mean me and people in my industry. We were unemployed for potentially, or in a way, actually even longer than 1 year, or certainly underemployed during that initial time period that we came back. But of course, all of this stuff we're going to be sharing in this video. So we're gonna get started, but as always, real fast, 10 really quick seconds. If you guys hopefully enjoyed videos like this, remember to smash the like button, or you can watch the end to decide. Consider subscribing and hitting the bell for similar videos, and feel free to leave a comment about honestly just really anything at all, questions, thoughts about anything. So with that being said, let's get this video started. So when it comes to talking about unemployment, the first lesson that I really learned is really about loyalty, or even more specifically, the lack of loyalty. Because when it comes to working in a company, I always say is that in an ideal company, I am, at least for me personally, I'm a believer that if I was to run a company, that there should always be a human touch to it, because the more motivated all the workers are inside of a company, the more efficient we can work together in order to try to accomplish a task. However, the story is that in many, many companies, just based off of the nature of it, it's run very capitalistically, at least certainly inside of our country, where there really isn't a lot of loyalty. In a lot of ways in our country, everything is run based off of profits. So what this really means is that a huge goal of working is just to make sure to realize is that there really isn't a lot of loyalty to it. People can and have been dropped from work at just any moment in time, and sometimes it's even for circumstances that are uncontrollable. But the big idea is that there's never a situation where the company really technically owes the employee anything beyond what's inside of the contract and money that's agreed upon, because again, you sign a contract that you work a certain amount and then you get paid a certain amount. Loyalty and the lack of that's probably the first thing that I really learned from being unemployed and having lost my job for about the better part of 1 year. The second thing I really learned about just being out of work for a year is really, and actually this is something that I even learned when I lost my job even before the pandemic, because this is not the first time that I've been unemployed before. I was unemployed for a whole bunch of different reasons, but it's really about favoritism and about how rampant it runs inside of our country, or just inside of work. It's not just our country, but it's just inside of the workforce in general. And it's really because this is actually something that's especially true if you are working a job that's not very easy to quantify, because there are many, many jobs where it's very, very easy to kind of gauge who is the better worker, right? If, say, for example, you work in sales, right? Who sold the most product? marketing, who had the most outreach, entertainment, who had the most views, profits, who had the finance, who made the most amount of money, and all this kind of stuff. And even that is technically a little bit subjective because, for example, in many sales companies, they don't give leads or how easy it is to land a sale within a particular lead equally to every single worker that's out there. But more or less, at least there's some way to kind of quantify the situation. But if you don't work a job where it's easy to kind of quantify who is the better worker, so for example, like especially a lot of administrative jobs where, you have a bunch of people that's doing almost the same thing, right? Let's say you work for customer service, right? There's not really a way to quantify it. You're doing the same exact thing, data entry, same story, you can even say accounting in a way, there's a little bit of a numbers, where you can quantify, but I mean more or less. At the end of the day, it's a group of people that are doing almost the same methodical procedure, having the same exact outcome. There's not really a way to differentiate. Once you go beyond that, everything is really run by favoritism. I have had jobs before where I felt that I did the same exact thing as another worker, but just for reasons, I was let loose. And the most likely reason was because of favoritism, off of that. There's a very long story to why I believe that or why this is the case, but you can kind of gauge it based off of the situation. If you have several workers that are doing the same exact thing, they produce the same outcome, the same result, how do you identify who is the better worker? At that point, a lot of times it's just really based off of who does your boss like better? Do you have nepotism on your side? Are you part of the image of the company? That matters actually a lot. Even though, I know many companies say they don't discriminate, there's an indirect discrimination that can sometimes happen in a lot of workforces based off of the way you look sometimes. It will never be spoken, but it is something that, you can kind of gauge and see it based off of how the interaction happens within a particular company. Now, moving on to the third thing that I really learned about being unemployed for 1 year is really about how important it is to diversify your income. And that is one of the biggest things I think that many finance channels really preach. And when you are actually finding yourself unemployed, if you ever find yourself unemployed, hopefully this is something that's going to be particularly resonating and important, is that because your job can be in danger of being lost at any time, one of the best things we can do for ourselves is just to find other sources of income to at least have some money coming in during times of difficulties, during times of hardships. It's a lot easier to say this than it is to do this. There are videos that I've made that talk about ways to, survive unemployment and everything about that. But the big idea is just to diversify your income. That's the most biggest takeaway. There are many examples, and this is a video on its own. Feel free to maybe comment if that is of interest. You can invest in the stock market. You can start a side business. You can side hustle. You can freelance services. You can have another part-time job in addition to the regular job that you currently have. You can build a really big savings account, collect interest. It's not a lot of money, but money is money at the end of the day. You can sign up for Webull in order to get some free stocks in the link down below, where they're going to give you up to maybe a couple $100 in free stocks just for making an account. If you guys, just shameless plug right there if you guys are interested in that. But moving on to the fourth thing that I really learned about being unemployed for 1 year is probably about how sometimes in a really strange way, I think that unemployment has a really negative connotation, and there's reason for it, and it makes sense why, because you're out of work, there's no income, obviously there's a lot of hardship happening. But in a really strange way, depending on your circumstance, sometimes it might actually even be a silver lining. What are examples of this is for example, one of the reasons why I was able to maybe career transition and pivot into my currently industry, which is, working in events and entertainment, is actually because I lost my job. Specifically, I lost my the first one. So the background stories of this is that I had a corporate job, I lost my corporate job, I found another corporate job, I started a lot of side ventures and all that kind of stuff. Eventually I resigned that job by choice now, so I was the one calling the shots now, and then I jumped into entertainment, and then eventually it floated by and I entered into the industry that I'm currently working in. And the big idea really is that there can be actually a lot of silver linings. There are many people that sometimes, because they lost their jobs, they ended up finding an even better job. There are times then maybe that because they lost their jobs, they learned a lot of things about it and ended up starting their own business. You know, there are people that maybe were able to just, even if it's something like being able to relax. You know, there were some people that were working a job and they were just very burnt out. By being unemployed, they were able to take that time to maybe travel, start a side hustle, work on other avenues, to just rest, to be able to enjoy life a little bit in other ways, you know. Because again, I always say is that unlike other finance channels, I think that as important as it is to make money, there is so much more than just making money to life, just even beyond just your job. You know, a lot of things like your health, your social aspect, your fulfillment, your emotion, everything in that particular world, that is something that's just as important that I don't think a lot of people are really thinking about right now at this time. And then the last thing that I'd really say that I really learned from being out of work for 1 year is really about acceptance and about the fact that a lot of times we lose our jobs, but sometimes it's important to note is that it's not our fault. Sometimes we can lose our jobs for uncontrollable situations. You know, it's very possible that we could be doing a great job, but maybe the company itself is not doing very well. Maybe it's, again, going back, favoritism happens. Maybe things are biased. You know, I've lost a job before because I really believe that it was due to favoritism, because they wanted to replace me with someone else that was believed to be better, even though our jobs involved, again, doing the same thing, producing the same result. But again, that's just up to them to decide, which sadly, you know, I mean, again, I say sadly, but again, keep in mind there were a lot of silver linings that came from it. So in a way, there were actually a lot of good stuff that maybe actually was a result of that. But the big idea is really to just understand that it happens, and that a lot of times it can sometimes be for reasons that it's not our fault. A lot of times it might be because of circumstances. You know, during the pandemic, many people lost their jobs, and you know, everyone in our industry went unemployed. It wasn't because of how good we performed the job. It just happened. You know, businesses can go under, industries can be impacted, markets change, economics comes in, you know, sometimes just a particular maybe something outside of work happens. It's just, it's sad, but it's just kind of a situation that happens. And I think it's something that we just have to really learn to absorb, that it happens. And that's the most important thing. But I think that with that being said, those are the 5 lessons that I really just want to express that maybe I personally learned, to give a little bit of a personal touch. Maybe feel free, if you've been unemployed, to name something that you particularly learned. It's always great to hear insight from other people. With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys made it to the end, remember to smash the like button, subscribe, hit the bell, feel free to leave a comment, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.